Welcome back to the next tier of the women serial killer iceberg. We have made it to tier 4, and as we dive deeper, the cases are getting even darker, even more twisted. If you have not seen the previous tiers, tier 3, 2, and 1, we are now at tier 4. I will link those in the description box. But just in case this is your first video in the iceberg chart journey, that's okay. You can start here too. I'll put a start time for the actual iceberg here, but for those of you who don't know what an iceberg chart is, it's a way to break down complex topics into levels, with the most well-known or least disturbing cases at the tip of the iceberg, like tier 1 and tier 2, and the more obscure or more disturbing cases towards the bottom. Now, in this tier, just like tier 3 and tier 2, you may notice a lot of repetition, not in the person themselves, just in what's happening in the case. You'll notice like a lot of nurses, a lot of poisonings. So yeah, we may encounter some familiar patterns, but don't let that distract you. While the cases may seem similar, they are very chilling in their own right, and I try to point out the differences between each one that may sound similar. And just a heads up, I feel like you probably should already know this by the name of the video, but this is a very disturbing topic. Again, these are serial killers. It is not sunshine and rainbows. It's a lot. So especially in tier 4. So if you're not in a mental headspace for this, I've got plenty of lighthearted videos to watch instead, but just a heads up. So buckle up and let's get started. HELENE JEGADO. HELENE JEGADO was a quiet but prolific serial killer who poisoned her way across 19th century France, leaving a trail of death in her wake. Working as a domestic servant and cook, she used her position to slip arsenic into the meals of people around her, often escaping suspicion because there were cholera outbreaks at the time, and the symptoms surrounding the arsenic poisoning and the cholera were very similar. Starting in 1833, she moved from town to town, poisoning her employers, her housemates, even children, seemingly without any motive beyond a thirst for power. By the time she was finally arrested in 1851, at least 36 deaths were linked to her. But of course, with many of the serial killers on this iceberg, especially from that long ago, the true number will probably never be known. During her trial, she went back and forth, alternating between like pious humility and then these crazy outbursts. She even denied knowing what arsenic even was. But science, even in the 19th century, told a very different story, and she was sentenced to death. Heather Irene PRESDEE. Heather PRESDEE was a nurse who turned nursing homes into death traps, injecting vulnerable patients with lethal doses of insulin. Operating across 5 facilities in Pennsylvania, she claimed that she was simply easing her patients' suffering, but her actions led to at least 3 confirmed murders and connections to 17 deaths in total. Her victims, ranging from middle-aged to elderly, had no chance against her so-called mercy. PRESDEE was arrested in May 2023 and charged with multiple counts of murder and attempted murder. Facing the death penalty, she pleaded guilty and received 3 consecutive life sentences, plus an additional 380 to 760 years, essentially guaranteeing she will never leave prison. Sarah Jane Robinson. Sarah Jane Robinson was a church-going widow with a deadly secret. She orchestrated a string of arsenic-laced murders, targeting her husband, children, brother-in-law, and even her landlord, all while collecting insurance payouts. When suspicion arose, her son William fell fatally ill, but managed to accuse his mother before dying. His preserved stomach provided the damning evidence, which was arsenic. Robinson was arrested alongside 2 accomplices, a doctor and a church leader, 2 people that you are supposed to find some sort of comfort in, but both were later cleared of charges. Convicted of murdering her brother-in-law, she was sentenced to death, though public pressure led to that turning into just life in prison. Nicknamed the Boston Borgia, she died behind bars in 1906. Carol Bundy. Carol Bundy was a nurse and one half of the Sunset Strip killers. After a string of abusive relationships, she fell in love with Douglas Clark, a sadistic killer with fantasies of murder. Together they prowled the Sunset Strip, luring women to their deaths. Bundy's crimes escalated when she killed her lover Jack Murray to keep him from exposing Clark, later decapitating him to conceal evidence. She also played a role in disposing of a young woman's body after Clark shot her. Arrested in 1980, Bundy initially denied everything, but later confessed and testified against Clark in exchange for a lighter sentence. In 1983, she pleaded guilty to 2 of the murders and was sentenced to 52 years to life. While Clark was sentenced to death, Bundy avoided execution and died in prison in 2003. Dianne Odell. Dianne Odell carried a horrifying secret for over a decade. That secret being 3 of her newborns murdered and hidden away in storage. When she defaulted on a storage unit in Safford, Arizona in 2003, the landlord made a grisly discovery: the remains of 3 infants packed away in boxes. Odell, who had 12 children in total, admitted the babies were born between 1981 and 1984, but claimed they died at birth. Investigators believed she killed them because they were illegitimate. Dubbed the Babies in Boxes murder case, the trial resulted in Odell being convicted of second-degree murder instead of first-degree. In 2004, she was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 2029. Hattie Whitten. Hattie Whitten was a mother-turned-murderer whose obsession with a new suitor may have led her to poison her own children. After the sudden death of her husband in 1900, suspected but never proven to be poisoning, Whitten's behavior became erratic, worsened by a morphine addiction. In 1902, her 11-year-old daughter Fanny died mysteriously, followed by 9-year-old Jenny just 2 months later. Suspicious authorities exhumed the bodies and found traces of arsenic and strychnine, the common thread being both children had life insurance policies in Hattie's name. Hattie Whitten was arrested the day after Jenny's funeral, and she denied everything but was soon confronted with damning evidence, including witnesses who saw her purchasing poison. Just days later, while under house arrest, Hattie Whitten hanged herself, leaving behind a lot of unanswered questions. There were whispers of a motive, which was that she had been courting a man who refused to marry a woman with children. Jeanne Weber. Jeanne Weber was a serial child killer who evaded justice time and time again. Dubbed the Ogress of the Goutte d'Or, apologies again, the French hate to see me coming, she preyed on young children. That included her own children, her nieces and nephews, and even those entrusted to her care as a babysitter. Between 1905 and 1908, at least 10 children died under mysterious circumstances, often with bruises on their necks, yet doctors repeatedly dismissed the deaths as convulsions or illness. Even after being caught red-handed, she managed to escape conviction, using her status as a grieving mother and hiring skilled legal defense. Of course, this did not scare her into stopping. She continued her spree, infiltrating hospitals and orphanages, before being caught in 1908 while strangling an innkeeper's son. Finally declared insane, Weber was institutionalized, where she ultimately met her end in 1918 by strangling herself. Judy Buenoano. Over nearly 2 decades, Judy Buenoano poisoned and murdered those closest to her, including her husband and multiple boyfriends, all for financial gain. Her killing spree came to an end in 1983 when a car bomb meant for her latest lover, John Gentry, failed to kill him. As investigators dug deeper, they realized that a lot of people died suffering mysterious illnesses, those people being linked to Judy, and to be more specific, it was later revealed to be arsenic poisoning. Exhumations confirmed her deadly scheme, leading to convictions for multiple murders and attempted murder. In 1998, Buenoano was sent to the electric chair with no final words and became the first woman executed in Florida in 150 years. Janie Lou Gibbs. Janie Lou Gibbs poisoned her husband, her 3 sons, and her grandson, all with arsenic between 1965 and 1967. Gibbs lived in Georgia at the time and from the outside seemed like a very devoted wife and mother. She was very active in her community, specifically active in her church. After taking the lives of her family members, she then took the insurance payouts and gave a lot of it to the church. During the time and in Gibbs's community specifically, this caused a very disturbing contradiction between her outward faith and her heinous crimes. Her murders were initially attributed to natural causes until medical examiners found arsenic in her grandson's body, prompting exhumations of her other victims. Gibbs was arrested and eventually confessed to her crimes, then went on to receive a life sentence in 1976. She spent the remainder of her life in prison where she died in 2010. Gesche Gottfried. Gesche Gottfried, known as the Angel of Bremen, poisoned 15 people over 14 years, including her parents, children, husbands, and fiancé. She mixed arsenic-laced mouse butter into their meals, then tended to them as they wasted away. Even as death trailed her, she was admired for her care and resilience. People chalked it up to her being endlessly unlucky. Gottfried's downfall came when a survivor found white granules in his food and reported it. Arrested on her 43rd birthday, she confessed and was sentenced to death. On April 21st, 1831, she was publicly executed, and hers was the last execution in Bremen's history. Cynthia Coffman. Cynthia Coffman and her boyfriend James Marlowe went on a violent crime spree in 1986, abducting and murdering multiple women across California and Arizona. What began as a drug-fueled relationship quickly escalated into a series of brutal killings. While Coffman confessed to being present at the murders, she claimed she was under Marlowe's control, suffering from battered women syndrome. The jury didn't buy it, and in 1990 she became the first woman sentenced to death in California since the reinstatement of capital punishment. Coffman later received an additional life sentence for another murder, and she remains on death row. Dagmar Overby. Between 1913 and 1920, Dagmar Overby posed as a caretaker for infants born out of wedlock, offering to find them adoptive homes. Instead, she murdered at least 9 children, possibly up to 25, by strangling, drowning, or burning them in her masonry heater. Authorities only uncovered her crimes when a suspicious mother reported Overby after she failed to provide an adoptive family's address. A search of Overby's home revealed gruesome evidence, leading to her arrest and one of Denmark's most notorious trials. Originally sentenced to death in 1921, her sentence was commuted to life in prison, where she died in 1929. Her case led to significant reforms in Danish childcare laws and inspired the 2024 film The Girl with the Needle. Bertha Gifford. Bertha Gifford was suspected of killing at least 17 people in the early 19th century. Gifford, a caregiver and a Missouri resident, was known for her great cooking and her role as a local healer. I'm sure you can see the direction we are going in now. This allowed her access to vulnerable individuals and children. Using, you guessed it, arsenic, she poisoned her victims under the guise of providing care, often even staying with them until their final hours to appear compassionate. And that is just like next level batshit crazy. There was an investigation in 1928 that led to the discovery of arsenic in the bodies of her last 3 victims. Gifford was arrested and charged with their murders. While she was found guilty, the court declared her insane, and she was committed to a mental institution where she remained until her death in 1951. Sarah Jane Whiteling. Sarah Jane Whiteling, also known as the wholesale poisoner, was a German-born American serial killer who poisoned her husband and 2 children in 1888. When she came to America, she resided in Ohio, and she had a pretty rough go at life. Big financial struggles, lots of tumultuous marriages. After the death of her first husband, she married John Whiteling in 1880 and had 2 children with him. In 1888, John and the children died in quick succession under very suspicious circumstances, as you can imagine. Not to be super repetitive, but like many poisonings over the years, their deaths were attributed to natural causes originally, but Sarah raised a lot of suspicions when she was very adamant about no autopsies. That led to an investigation, and then police did discover the arsenic in their bodies. Sarah admitted to poisoning her daughter because she believed that the daughter would grow up to be, quote, sinful and wicked, and she claimed to have killed her son Willie because he was, quote, in the way. Weirdly, she did deny poisoning her husband, claiming that he poisoned himself. Despite her defense team's claim that she was insane, Sarah was convicted of first-degree murder for the death of her daughter and was sentenced to death. I don't know why she wasn't charged with the other 2, but that's what it is. I guess they thought one charge was enough. She was executed by hanging on July 25th, 1889, becoming the first woman executed in Philadelphia County. Linda Hazzard. Linda Hazzard ran a sanitarium in Washington where she promoted fasting as a cure for all ailments, leading to the deaths of at least 15 patients. Under her care, patients were subjected to starvation diets, brutal massages, and hours-long enemas. In 1912, she was convicted of manslaughter for the death of a wealthy British woman whom she had starved to under 50 pounds while also forging her will. So no, she was not doing this simply out of the goodness of her heart. Her forging one of her patients' wills shows me she knew exactly what she was doing, but it's complicated because she also believed in her own regimen. We'll get to that in a second. But unfortunately, there are some cases that just don't make sense because a lot of these people don't have brains that make sense. Anyways, she only went on to serve 2 years in prison, then later reopened her practice, branding it a quote school of health to bypass medical licensing laws. Her sanitarium burned down in 1935, and in a final twist of irony, and why I believe that she believed in her own methods to some degree, she died in 1938 from self-imposed starvation while following her own fasting regimen. Mary Clement. Mary Clement, sometimes she goes by Marie Clement as well, was a Luxembourg-born serial killer who poisoned her parents and sisters in Dubuque, Iowa before attempting to murder her surviving sister's entire family with arsenic-laced soup. Though never charged with the family murders, she was arrested after her brother-in-law grew suspicious and sent the mysterious powder found in their meals for testing. Initially denying everything, she later confessed to multiple killings, claiming she was, quote, overcome with the feeling to end her loved one's suffering. She was sentenced to just 1 year in prison, but later wrote a chilling letter admitting to all of the murders. After serving her time, she quietly relocated to Los Angeles, where she lived a seemingly ordinary life until her death at 81. Francisca Ballesteros. Francisca Ballesteros poisoned her first daughter in 1990, but waited 14 years before resuming her killing spree. By 2004, she had met a man online and decided to rid herself of her family to start a new life. She poisoned her husband and second daughter with a mix of drugs, then attempted to kill her 12-year-old son, who survived after an 8-month recovery. Her plan unraveled when an autopsy revealed poisoning, leading to her arrest and confession. Ballesteros was sentenced to 84 years in prison. Christine Maleva. Christine Maleva was a French nurse who initially confessed to killing 30 terminally ill patients, claiming she was granting their final wishes. However, her story unraveled when families denied their loved ones had requested euthanasia, and a report suggested she had a morbid fascination with death. She was charged with murder rather than manslaughter, with prosecutors arguing she killed to satisfy her own compulsions. Initially seen as a compassionate figure by many, the nurse who just wanted to end the suffering of the patients who were asking her to do so, public opinion turned against her as all the details emerged and it showed that she was just doing this for herself. In 2003, she was only sentenced to 10 years in prison and was permanently banned from nursing. ANJETTE LYLES. ANJETTE LYLES was born in 1925 in Macon, Georgia, and was responsible for the deaths of 4 of her relatives between 1952 and 1958. She started her killing spree after her husband died in 1952. She ended up marrying another man in 1955 who also died, which was quite suspicious. After the deaths of Lyle's mother-in-law and daughter, that's when people really started to side-eye her. I feel like a broken record, but that suspicion led to an investigation, and that investigation uncovered the use of arsenic poisoning. Lyles had been administering the arsenic in very small doses over time, which I feel like is even more sinister than outright killing somebody. She wanted to watch them die gradually. As I mentioned, the authorities discovered this, and while she was originally sentenced to death, she was later diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. So instead of execution, she was sent to the state hospital where she spent the rest of her life up until her death in 1977. And that is the end of tier 4. We are almost at the end of this iceberg journey. I do apologize. I know this tier was like super repetitive. Maybe it was just me, but it was like poisoning, poisoning, poisoning. I really tried to split it up. I did my best. We have one more tier to go, tier 5. And tier 5 basically consists of all of the serial killers who got big red stars next to their names after reading what they did. Just the most heinous, buck wild things you could imagine. It's insane. Make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss it. And I will see you in tier 5.